Hey everybody, it is Sunday afternoon and we're going to take a trip around the world. We're going to start here on my 29 Miscellaneous as we always do. Not a lot to talk about in this tank this week as usual. I did just top it off, and in the process of doing so I got some of the floating vegetation to go down there and get stuck on the filter intake, which made me realize the filter intake is kind of clogged up, so it's probably about time to get in there and do a little more significant maintenance than simply topping the tank off. But otherwise, not much going on. I did want to point out that I've been watching my Bolivian ram. I had to find him for a minute there. I've had this Bolivian ram for several months now, and it still looks really thin and small and dull in color. It behaves fairly normally. It eats every time I put food in the tank. But it's just not growing very much, and it's certainly not displaying any kind of colors that I would normally expect. I know the Bolivian rams are not nearly as colorful as the German blue rams, but the Bolivian rams are still fairly colorful, even the females. I've had Bolivian rams in the past, and they were always more colorful than this, and they were always much larger than this. They actually get fairly significant. And so I'm beginning to wonder whether or not there is an internal parasite issue or something like that. And if so, should I remove it from the tank and put it in my quarantine tank and treat it? If it does have a parasite, is it not better to simply treat it in situ? And then that way everybody in the tank will get treated, because potentially everybody in there might have been exposed to whatever parasite that fish may have. It may simply be a runt, sickly fish that's never going to do well and just isn't going to grow much. You know, I bought it at a big chain pet store, so the genetics are not top quality. I didn't get it from a high-quality breeder or anything. So I don't know, but it is something for me to consider, because I've been watching it for the last couple of weeks now that I've noticed it doesn't really seem to be growing. And since I've been keeping my eye on it, I kind of confirmed it really just does not seem to be growing. So we'll be thinking about what to do with that. But other than that, everything is pretty much normal in this tank. I almost always have at least one loach that hides in there and likes to lay there with his face sticking out like a dog in his doghouse. I love my loaches. I think they're awesome fish. So moving on to my 55-gallon Gourami tank. I was actually just in here shooting some video that I was posting on Instagram of my Siamese algae eaters. So if you want to follow me on Instagram, you'll get little tidbits like that, little short videos of specific fish. Nothing specific, just some cool footage of it up close. Anyway, nothing really going on in this tank that I can think of talking about. Still got that red algae or red cyanobacteria that grows down at this end of the tank. I don't really care about that. I think it kind of looks sort of cool, actually, as long as it's not interfering with the tank in any way. And it's not. It's just what it looks like. So if you find that unappealing, then, you know, that's just a matter of opinion. It's not hurting anything. As far as the fish in the tank, everything's going well. I've been keeping an eye on my newest addition, which is my little golden zebra loach here. I did have a little bit of a concern that it might have had ick. It is a new fish. I didn't quarantine it. And it does have a few little flecks and speckles on its fins, but as I suspected, that's just the coloration. It's not uncommon for fish that have relatively clear fins to have little flecks and sparkles depending on which direction the light's hitting it, and it can often look like they're starting to develop the first signs of ick. So it was worth keeping an eye on, but it turned out to be nothing more than the fish's own coloration and nothing to worry about, because it's been several weeks now and the fish is showing no sign of an outbreak. No other fish in the tank is showing any signs of it, so we're free and clear of the ick. So this is the kind of activity I was just shooting video of to post on Instagram, and that is my Siamese algae eaters in there earning their keep. I know for as much as people like to say they don't eat algae very much as they get older, I simply find that not to be true. I don't know how much older you'd have to get. These things are the biggest Siamese algae eaters I've ever seen. I bought them that big. I didn't grow them that big, so I have no idea how old they are, but they're significant. And they still eat a ton of algae. Now, they may eat less than they do when they're small, but that still doesn't mean they don't eat algae and they don't keep your tank clean. Every time I look in here, they're either chasing each other around or they're nibbling on algae and doing their job. So don't believe that algae eaters don't eat algae when they get older. They just eat less, but they still eat a significant amount. And, of course, I'm not talking about the Chinese algae eaters. I'm talking about the Siamese algae eaters. So, moving on to my 55-gallon tank. I finally got around to officially changing the name on my playlist. So this is now officially my 55-gallon tank, since my T-bar is no longer with us and hasn't been for a while. Nothing really to speak of in this tank. I just did a big water change. I also did a big water change on my Gourami tank there. I'm going to be shooting some videos sitting in front of these tanks later today probably, and I wanted the tanks to look nice and pretty behind me. So did a big water change. I wiped the glass down. You can see I did it in kind of a hurry. Little areas here and there where I missed. It's kind of hard to see all the little spots. You can see some here, some there, whatever. So that's my haphazard way of wiping the glass down. I did shoot some video the other day of my diamond tetras. That was last night actually, as I was turning the lights out, getting the room darkened. And I did notice the other day some interesting behavior with my little Synodontis lucipinnis, whose tail you can kind of see back there in the rocks. It was kind of swimming around and hassling my angelfish as though it was one of my loaches in one of my other tanks. The way they sort of cruise around the fish like they're looking for parasites or trying to groom them or something. And I've seen it do similar behavior to that before, but never so much as it was the other day when I saw it doing it. It almost looked like it was trying to feed off of the angelfish in the way that a Chinese algae eater might try to get the slime coat off of another flat-bodied fish. I've actually lost angelfish to the Siamese algae eater just for that very purpose. So it kind of concerned me, but I've never seen my Synodontis lucipinnis exhibit that kind of behavior before, so it was really strange. I tried to creep in the room. Of course, I was watching from the doorway. As soon as I got into the room fully and they became aware of me, they went their separate ways. You can see my catfish just spends most of its time down there. You can see it right in between the rocks. And so naturally, when I came over, the behavior stopped, and I wasn't able to get any good video footage of it. It was just kind of from a distance. But I put some shrimp pellets in the tank, hoping maybe that would satiate the catfish. Maybe it was looking for a little bit more meaty type food, and I haven't seen that kind of behavior since. So maybe that's just something to think about. Maybe even the Synodontis will get a little, meat hungry after a while if they don't get some kind of meat in their diet, even though I typically think of the Synodontis as being more of the vegetable type eating fish. So anyway, moving on from this tank, although we can stop and have one last look at one of my medium-sized Siamese algae eaters in this tank, and the other one is lying on the gravel in the back of the tank there. So we'll move on to my 40 breeder. I probably should have taken a few minutes to wipe the glass down on this tank before shooting this video, but it just kind of, the stuff growing on the glass just sort of speaks to the condition of the tank in general. Now that I'm standing over here looking at it, that Cory right there doesn't look very good. It always seems like I've got at least one fish in this tank that's not doing well. I did have a rainbow fish in this tank that was not doing well. I honestly don't even know if it's still alive. I haven't seen it since the day before yesterday, and it was so skinny and withered, and if it even died, I'm not worried about a pneumonia spike or anything like that. It would have just turned into fish food for the other fish in the tank. So if it's gone, then it's probably already gone. Gone. Like I won't even find the remains of it. Or else it's still alive in there and swimming around somewhere. But again, I haven't seen it since yesterday. So this tank is definitely one that I really need to get in there and do a little bit of work to. Not sure what's going on with it. I've still got plenty of water flow. I'm even getting some bubbles in the water from the filter picking up some air from the intake, so I'm definitely getting plenty of oxygen in the water. Not sure what's going on with that Cory. But again, the tank is not unkempt. It's just overgrown. I just haven't gotten in here and done anything for a long time. So one of these days I will get in here and we will remove a bunch of these plants and we will get this tank opened back up. I might change the filter and the circulation. You can imagine how little water flow there is when you get down into the bottom areas of this tank. It's probably very little water flow because it's so overgrown and everything. So I'm definitely concerned about this Cory. I don't think that Cory is going to be with us for very much longer. Does not look good at all. So we'll have to keep an eye on that. But this will be a tank we get to one of these days soon. Again, I'm just kind of thinking about what I want to do with it, and whether I want to really change it over fully or take the top off. I really would like to take the top off. I've thought about that for a long, long time. But I've got the rainbow fish in this tank, and I'm always afraid that with the rainbow fish, they're just going to come flying right up out of the top of it if I take it off. So we'll have to wait and see what happens with this tank. My 125-gallon native tank. We've actually got plenty to talk about with this tank this week. First thing we will talk about is my angelfish. I had put a small angelfish in this tank that I got from Petco, and within a few days I noticed that that angelfish had sort of cloudy eyes, and it just didn't look very good. So I moved it into my quarantine tank, which I was trying to avoid because there was already sick fish in my quarantine tank. We'll get to them in a minute. You can see them right now on the video, actually, if you look carefully. And once the sick angelfish was over in the quarantine tank, I waited and I watched and I waited and I watched, and eventually I found out that my other angelfish, the big angelfish that was currently in this tank, which I do not see at the moment, started looking pretty rough too. It was starting to get cloudy scales, and it just started looking like it had freshwater velvet disease, which is also an external parasite, similar to but not the same as ick. And so at that point, I began treating the tank. I actually have one treatment left today, and it will be the last treatment. There's the angelfish hiding up there in the corner. I'm not really sure why it's hiding like that now. It's almost hiding as though it's still sick. But it was out and about yesterday. Again, I posted some video on my Instagram of the angelfish out swimming around during feeding time, and that was a big deal, the fact that it came out during feeding time. That's the first time I've seen it really actively feeding since it got sick. And yesterday afternoon, it was just, I came in the room and it was just out in the tank with all the other fish. And of course, once I came in the room, it went and hid back in the corner. It's a really shy angelfish. It's really strange. Most angelfish are very outgoing or even downright aggressive. They practically bang on the glass when you walk in the room. They're waiting for their dinner. But that one always goes and shies away every time I come in the room. Not really sure why. Maybe because I gave it velvet and it knows I'm the one responsible for that. I don't know. Anyway, the fish that I had in my quarantine tank, I had been struggling mightily with ick, and 2 out of the 6 of them wound up dying. I did find out what the problem was. I'm going to be shooting a video about ick and treating for ick because I learned something new and very interesting about that, so definitely make sure you're subscribed. You don't want to miss that. It will be coming up very soon. I got so many videos to shoot, I try to not do more than 3 or 4 a day, but I do have a video about ick coming up very soon. Again, I learned something really interesting about it due to a mistake I was making, nothing to do with the medication that wasn't working or anything else. But long story short, if it's not too late already, I did get those fish healed up, well, the 4 that survived anyway, and now you can kind of see them in the back there if you can see through my reflection. And of course now they're not going to cooperate, and I don't even see where they went. But I've got 4 silver dollars in here somewhere. You can kind of tell they're back there. If you go back and look at the other video when I said that you could see them in the tank, they were in the bottom right-hand corner of the video at that point. But I've got 4 silver dollars in here, and I have 4 more silver dollars currently in my quarantine tank. They're just much smaller, and so I kind of separated them, and I'm going to let them grow out a little bit. But I've wanted silver dollars for a long, long time, but once upon a time I sort of wrote them off as fish that wouldn't be acceptable for my tanks for whatever reason. I'm not even sure why I decided that that was just the kind of fish I couldn't have. But when I saw these in the store the other day, it was 6 of them. They were big and beautiful, and they were already swimming around in the school, and I just said I got to take them. And so I brought the 6 home, and they, of course, had ick on them when I brought them home. I knew that was part of the reason I wanted to bring them home. I knew they were probably just going to die in somebody else's aquarium if I didn't bring them home. And so I did lose 2 out of the 6, but again, that was due to a mistake I was making in the way I was treating them, and I will be shooting a video about that coming up, as I said. So that's what's really going on in the native tank. If you did not catch my most recent video where I talked about my nearite snails, you can see one of them right there. Well, you can just look at the surface of everything in here and see what a job those nearite snails are doing on that green spot algae that I used to have in this tank. It was Well, it's green spot algae by name, and usually you see it in little spots on the glass in your tank, but given enough time, it all grows in together and merges into one gigantic spot, and that's what had happened in this tank. Everything in there was dark green, and it was dark green because it was covered with that really, really nasty green spot algae that you can't even rub off with your thumbnail. I mean, it's like glue. It gets on the stuff so badly, and nothing eats it except for a couple of fish and nearite snails. So I put 5 nearite snails in this tank, and again, the difference, you know, you look at this piece of woodwork, that was all green. Most of that woodwork down there was green. The rocks were green. I mean, it was a lot of that algae in here, and it is just gone, and these nearite snails have torn it up. So I'm really happy with that purchase. It's really, really made a big difference in making this tank look nice and sharp. We're also starting to get a little bit of new growth coming in. You can see we've got the, you know, new growth here. We got some new growth coming in on this. And I really want to make some adjustments before the new growth gets too established, because I'm going to have to disturb it again and probably start the process all over. I think, excuse me, I think by now this big piece of wood right here, you can see it sticks all the way up there, and then this one line across the back is separate. But all of this is one big piece. And it's like that because I've got it wedged in there. It was floating like a cork when I put it in the tank. You can see it's got this rock weighting it down. It's got this rock, which is literally jammed in underneath of this and preventing it from floating up. It's just a wedge in there holding it down. And then I've got this huge rock. I mean, the wood itself goes all the way down to here, and this rock is laying up inside of it. And then I've got another big rock lying on that end. So that's what I had to do just to hold that thing down in the tank. And as a result, it's kind of way down this way and up on the end of the tank. And what I want to do is slide it down and in and try to get this more level across the bottom. And then we'll have this more vertical, just kind of sticking up this way. And we'll just have to wait and see how much adjustment I can make and how waterlogged that's become. I don't really know how long that's been in the tank, but it seems like it's been in there long enough now that I shouldn't have to pile 800 pounds of rocks on it and wedge it in there just to hold it down. You know, it floated like a dugout canoe before, but, well, actually it didn't float like a dugout canoe. A dugout canoe floats just above the surface of the water. This thing was floating like a cork. So we'll see what happens with that, but that's my next real goal, to change up this tank. I want to situate that a little bit, move it around, and make a little bit more room. And you can just about make out my angelfish back there. So you have to take my word for it. It's looking a lot better. So today's the final day of the medication, and I'm satisfied that it's already done its trick, but we're going to do its final day anyway. Nothing really to talk about in my snail tank. I do still have a couple of shrimp living in there. I saw them the other day, so I suppose that's worth noting. My purple spotted gudgeon tank, if you don't follow along regularly, then this will be the first time you're seeing the top has been removed. Took all the lights and everything off of it. I just simply hung one of those Cree LED floodlights above it. Love those things. They've got a really, really fantastic light spectrum. It's very, very similar to natural daylight. This is a 5000K. You can also get them in 3000 or 2700K. I think it's 2700K is the softer version of this, but I like the more sort of bright afternoon light rather than that late afternoon softer light. But the tank looks good. I opened it up. I took a lot of the plants out of there, trimmed them way back. My gudgeon's not particularly happy about that. These kind of live in the shadows underneath the overhanging bushes and stuff. They're a predatory fish. It just lays in wait. So they prefer a darker environment. That's one of the reasons I didn't put the light directly above it. I kind of hung it a couple feet above it and to spread the light out a little bit and give him some shadows down there to hide in. So he's happy enough, and once this gets going and gets a little bit bushier, it'll be even more shady in there. The most recent thing I did was my peace lily upstairs. I divided a chunk off of it, and we're going to call it a Brazilian sword because it's now in my aquarium, and if it's in an aquarium, it's a Brazilian sword. And you can even see it's already got new growth coming off of it, and I'm hoping that's going to grow up and emergent. If not that one, then the next shoot coming out will definitely shoot up and out, and we will have an emergent growth plant there. And of course my temple plant right here, all this, it's hygrophila, all that's going to start growing up and out of the tank, and that's the stuff that grows like crazy, the swamp weed. I've got it in my tank upstairs. This has a sand substrate rather than gravel. So we will have to wait and see what happens. I think it's probably going to sort of grow up and fall over at the same time. I don't think it's really going to grow sturdy and upright, but we'll have to wait and see. Time will tell. My 125-gallon tank, we can kind of get a look at most of it this way. It basically is just packed with vegetation at this point. I really need to get in there and make the sacrifice and remove some of these plants. I've got so much Java fern. I can take all of that out of there and still have a nice chunk of Java fern right there. My water lily here, I would just go ahead and leave alone, let that do its thing. I really need to probably get a Siamese algae eater in this tank too. I've got that hair algae growing all over everything, and while it does get nibbled up by the gourami that's in this tank, and probably even the rainbow fish nibble on it a little bit, the Siamese algae eater will just destroy that stuff. They just tear up that hair algae. I love them. So you can actually see all the little scrapey tooth marks. That's from my chocolate zebra plecos in there, scraping on the glass, getting that algae that's growing there. So the water's clean enough. I did a water change not too terribly long ago. I don't remember exactly when it was, but it hasn't been too long. It's just that this tank always gets a lot of growth on the glass, especially down this end. This is because of the light from the waterfall tank that we're standing next to. It's a really powerful LED, and it lights the room up like outside daylight, sunshine, and it shines on that tank there, and it actually causes algal growth because of the excess light. So all in all, I just really need to get in there and give it a big haircut. I've done that recently, but all that probably did was just sort of get it spurred into shooting out some new growth and some new shoots and everything, and it probably got even thicker after I did that. I definitely need to get in and remove some of the water sprite. Let some more light into the tank. I've got such beautiful fish in this tank, and you can barely even see them, but they are in there. I also need to get my Tenopoma acutirostra, my African spotted leaf fish, is really shy now. It does not come out nearly as much as it used to, and part of that happened after I lost my Synodontis eupteris that used to be in this tank, my African featherfin squeaker catfish, and they used to pal around together. I used to call them my odd couple, and this was a fairly outgoing fish, and after that catfish died, I just don't see this one being out and about very much. Even at feeding time, he doesn't come out very often anymore. So I'm not really sure what that's all about. Somebody suggested that it was a matter of the Synodontis being like a dither fish, and the Tenopoma here felt comfortable coming out as long as there was another fish that it could swim around with, another large fish. But I've got other fish that are fairly significant in size in this tank, including the snakeskin gourami, which is getting pretty big at this point. So I don't necessarily know if that's the case. I would almost see this fish as well, I don't know. It's hard to say. It's unusual behavior. This fish has never been reclusive in all the years I've had it. It is a predatory fish. They do sort of hide and lay in wait and wait for smaller fish to swim above them, and then they make a snack out of them. So, you know, perhaps that's got something to do with it. But definitely noticed the difference in behavior after that Synodontis died. Here's my snakeskin gourami that I was just talking about. Definitely starting to develop some size on him or her. I'm not even sure which one it is. So that's pretty good indication of, you know, size. It's about the length of my hand already. And they will get to be 8 to maybe 10 inches. I think the last one I had, the biggest one I've ever had, was probably about 9 inches, but they can get up to about 10 inches if you've got them in a big enough aquarium in the right environment and everything. Awesome fish. Really like my snakeskin gouramis. I definitely think they're one of the underrated gouramis. They're kind of drab in color, and they get fairly large, so those two things combined make them, you know, of limited appeal. You got to have a tank big enough for them, and you got to mind, you know, you got to not mind having sort of just a grayish brown fish. But I don't mind the subtle beauty in these colors at all, especially when you put them in a tank next to all these colors. So moving on to my 20-gallon open-topped angelfish tank. This is the tank that I pulled some of my diamond tetras out of, and we put them in my 55-gallon tank so I could have one big school of diamond tetras over there. And I have not replaced them with anything. I'm thinking about doing some simple neons or something like that. But every neon I've gotten recently has died of ick. Again, we will be talking about that soon. Again, I battled mightily with the ick for 3 weeks or 4 weeks or something before I finally figured out what was going on. So again, make sure you're subscribed. You won't miss that. It is coming up real soon. I definitely want to talk about that. But other than that, not a lot to talk about with this tank. Probably needs a haircut too. I do like it with just the sort of one centerpiece of fern right there in the middle, but that centerpiece is getting kind of large, so it's probably worth just pulling out of there and then just, you know, replacing it with one single piece. And don't forget, I sell all my plants that I pull out of the tanks and everything. They will probably come with a little bit of added bonus algae, maybe a few snails, but all of the plants that I'm talking about, all this stuff on my water sprite, I got all that stuff for sale, so check my email down below if you're interested in any of that. I did get in here the other day, and while I left the main body of this piece of water sprite in here, because I do enjoy this emergent growth, I did go through and I pulled all the little new plants and everything out of the middle and separated them out, so it opened it up a little bit more, allows some light to get in there, and the tank doesn't look quite so dark. So that's about all that's going on in my 20-gallon angelfish tank. My quarantine tank. This is the tank that I was fighting with. Again, we will talk about that in the near future, but I haven't shown this tank in quite a while, so I figured it was worth a look today. You can see my 4 little silver dollars. One's behind the heater and the other 3 are in front of it. I pulled a whole mass of Java moss out of there the other day. That was all grungy and gross and needed to get removed. And then all of this stuff you see on the glass right there, that is green spot algae that has been left so long that it is doing what I said, and it's merging and growing and becoming one big spot of algae. And I do want to shoot a video about this. I'm going to demonstrate how I can remove this and how those magic erasers, those melamine sponges, how effective they are at removing green spot algae, because that would take a razor blade otherwise. And so I'm going to be shooting a video real soon about how to use those melamine sponges and get rid of all that nasty green spot algae like that. So that's about all that we got going on in the quarantine tank. I am on top of the ick. It is ick free at this point. I'm no longer medicating it. We're all good. So moving on to my brackish tank here, my pseudo brackish tank. Let me get the light turned on. I got a light on the front that I don't usually keep on unless I'm shooting video. Now, once again, for my Instagram followers, I shot some video recently where I explained that I had left my GoPro in this tank overnight. I'd set it to record and did a feeding video and forgot it, and it just sat there till the battery ran dead. So I said I was probably going to have hours and hours of footage. Well, the battery only lasts about an hour and a half. I went through all that footage, and somehow or another, when I dropped the snails in for the feed, I thought I dropped them directly in front of the camera, but somehow they went past it and were off screen, and all you heard was like off-screen crunching for about 5 minutes, and then you saw Butterbean like swimming back and forth like he's doing now, maybe occasionally swimming up and looking into the camera and then swimming past. And so all that footage turned out to be not really worth much of anything. So no Butterbean feeding video in the immediate future. Of course, all that's involved in a Butterbean feeding video is sticking the camera in the tank and making sure the snails actually go in front of the camera, and then you got your feeding video. So there is 1, 2, and 3 of my little bumblebee gobies. That's the most I've seen out at the same time in a while. Those bumblebee gobies don't seem to last very long, and I never see dead bodies. They always just seem to not be there. I had 8 of them in this tank at one point, and now I'm down to, if I see 3 at one time, like I just said, I'm kind of excited about seeing all 3 of them at once. So I don't know if I'll buy any more to put in this tank. I'm kind of waiting for the one lone molly I have in here to die off, and then I'll be able to put some other mollies in here. I'm actually thinking about putting a male and a female of some really swanky mollies. I've got an idea. I know a fish store that sells some really, really nice mollies. Just some really different stuff, and they usually charge an arm and a leg. But if I can get a male and a female, and I can get them in this brackish environment, then that would be worth it, because I could actually do something with the all the little babies I would get. But that's just food for thought, and it's all going to depend on when that molly I've currently got in here finally dies. The other one did already, so I'm just down to the one. And lastly, it's worth mentioning, I do need to get in here and do some more maintenance and get some more of that red cyanobacteria out. I think this tank's probably ready for chemi-clean treatment. Not so much that I can't just get in there and do a water change and remove some of that, but again, we can shoot the video about the chemi-clean treatment, talk a little bit about it, explain the air stone, how it works, all that good stuff, and we'll get a good look at how effective the chemi-clean is on that red cyanobacteria. And one last note I wanted to make. If you've ever wondered why we start here and go around the room that way and end up here rather than simply starting here and going that way, that is because when I started doing my Around the World updates, that was the first fish tank in the room. When you came into the room, there's the light switch and there's the door to the closet, and there was no fish tank here because that's how we had to get into the closet. I actually paid somebody to build a door on this end of the wall, so we now go into the closet that way, and this is just a non-used door, and that freed up that space for me to be able to put a fish tank here. So that's why I'm finally able to have a fish tank here. And since traditionally I always started right there at my 29, we still do, even though we're right next to it. So there you go, a little over 30 minutes. That was a good one for me. Don't forget to make sure you're subscribed. You don't want to miss anything I got coming up. Maybe we'll get to find out what happens with this little Bolivian ram. So if you're subscribed, you won't miss that or anything else. Don't forget, this one is my 29 Miscellaneous. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you real soon in the next one.